October 12, 1990, a judge orders Kodak to pay Polaroid $909 million, the largest patent judgment in American history. 11 years later, to the day, Polaroid filed for bankruptcy. So what happened in between? Everyone says the company Edwin Land built Miss Digital. They did not. By 1989, 42% of Polaroid's research budget went to digital. They had a working digital camera in 1992. They saw it coming and buried it. This is Bygonomics. To understand why Polaroid couldn't let go, you have to understand the man who built it. Edwin Land dropped out of Harvard at 19. Not because he was failing, because he was busy. He had become obsessed with polarized light, and Harvard was slowing him down. He worked nights in a laboratory he wasn't supposed to be in. He climbed through a window to use it. By 1932, he had a company. By 1937, it had a name, Polaroid. And here's the thing about Land that explains everything that comes later. He did not think of himself as a businessman. He thought of himself as a scientist who happened to own a factory. He held 533 patents by the end of his life, second only to Thomas Edison. Land didn't build products. He built demonstrations of what he believed was possible. In 1943, Land was on holiday in Santa Fe with his daughter. He took her picture. She was 3 years old, and she asked him a question that no adult would have thought to ask. Why do we have to wait to see it? Land went for a walk, and by the time he came back, this is his own account, he had solved it. The camera, the film, the chemistry, all of it in about an hour in his head. It took 5 years to actually build. In November 1948, the first Polaroid camera went on sale in a Boston department store. They expected to sell 50 on the first day. They sold out. Now here is where the business turns into a trap, and it happens so quietly that almost nobody notices it happening. For years, Polaroid made money the normal way: sell a camera, make a margin. Then in 1965, they released a cheap little camera called the Swinger, and they deliberately did something different. They cut the price of the camera to the bone, and they raised the price of the film. Because a camera is something you buy once. Film is something you buy forever. It worked spectacularly. As one former chief executive put it, in the photographic business, all the money is in the software. None of it is in the hardware. We were good at making hardware, but we never made money on it. Polaroid was no longer a camera company. It was a film company that gave away cameras. In October 1972, Land walked onto a stage and pulled a flat, folding, chrome and leather object out of his jacket pocket, the SX-70. You pressed a button, and a square slid out, and in front of your eyes, a picture appeared out of nothing. Polaroid had spent over $2 million on the eyepiece alone. Life magazine put him on the cover. A genius and his magic camera. This was the top. And it is worth stopping here, because everything you are about to watch happens to a company that was, at this exact moment, one of the most admired in the world. The first crack was not digital. It was 1977, and it was called Polavision, instant home movies. You filmed, you dropped the cartridge into a viewer, and you watched. $699. It had two problems. Each cartridge held about 2.5 minutes, and it had no sound at all. Meanwhile, in electronics shops down the street, you could buy a video cassette recorder, longer, with sound, and you could record over it. In 1979, Polaroid sold the remaining Polavision equipment off as a job lot and took a write-off of $68.5 million. Land had bet the company's credibility on it, and he had been wrong. What happened next was not a firing. It was slower than that, and colder. In 1975, Land handed over the presidency. In 1980, after Polavision, he stopped being chief executive, and in July 1982, he resigned as chairman and sold every share he owned. 50 years, gone, in 3 quiet steps. He never gave another interview about it. He spent the rest of his life in a research institute he founded himself, working on color vision, and he asked that his papers be destroyed when he died. He died on March 1st, 1991. 4 months before Kodak wrote Polaroid, the biggest check in the history of American patent law. He never saw the money, because while all of that was happening, Polaroid was at war. In April 1976, Kodak launched its own instant camera. Polaroid sued them 9 days later. The case took nearly a decade to answer one question: did Kodak copy? In 1985, a court said yes. Kodak had infringed 7 of Polaroid's patents. The consequence was brutal, and it landed on ordinary people. In January 1986, Kodak was ordered out of instant photography entirely. 16.5 million Americans woke up owning a camera that nobody on Earth would ever make film for again. Kodak offered them $50, or a different camera. Then, on October 12, 1990, Judge A. David Mazzone put a number on it: $909 million. It was reduced slightly on appeal. And on July 15, 1991, Kodak paid Polaroid $925 million. Polaroid's best year, on paper, was that year. Earnings of $683 million. But look closer. $871 million of that came from the lawsuit. Strip out the money they won from Kodak, and the actual business, the cameras, the film, the thing they had spent 40 years building, earned $246 million. The greatest payday in the history of patent law was hiding a company that had stopped growing. So now we get to the part everybody gets wrong. Polaroid did not sleep through digital photography. Polaroid was early. They started an electronic imaging group in 1981. In 1986, they opened a microelectronics laboratory and spent about $30 million building it. By 1989, 42% of Polaroid's entire research budget was going to digital imaging. Look at their patents. In the late 70s, electronics was 6% of what Polaroid patented. By the late 80s, it was 28%. And in 1992, they had it: a working digital camera. 300 people were working on digital research inside the company, 4 years before they sold one. So why didn't they sell it? A researcher who was there described the argument. Senior management, he said, used to turn their noses up at 38% margins, and their argument was always the same question: why 38% when I can get 70% on film? That is the whole story. That is the entire company in one sentence. A digital camera has no film. No film means no second purchase. No second purchase means the machine that had printed money since 1965 simply stops. They were not confused about the technology. They understood it perfectly. They just could not make the arithmetic work, because they were doing the arithmetic on the old business. The people building the future inside Polaroid knew exactly what was happening to them. One of them put it like this: what we had was a constant fight with senior management for 5 years. We constantly challenged the notion that the core business was old, antiquated, and unable to go forward. 5 years. Arguing inside your own building that the thing paying your salary is already dead. And the chief executive said the quiet part out loud in 1997. In the digital world, he said, "We believe hard copy is required. Unless there is a consumable component, the business model falls apart." He was right. That is exactly what happened. He just drew the wrong conclusion from it. Polaroid finally released a digital camera in 1996, the PDC 2000. It was good. It won awards. Best digital product of the year. It sold badly, and the reason is almost funny. Management refused to give it its own sales channel. So a $1,000 professional digital camera was handed to the same sales force that sold instant film. As one manager put it, these people were used to going to Kmart and Walmart. By the time it shipped, more than 40 companies were already selling digital cameras. Meanwhile, the money went somewhere else entirely. A medical imaging project called Helios, burning about $120 million a year, 3 times the budget of the whole electronic imaging division. It was sold off in 1996. Research spending was cut from $165 million to $116. Advertising went up. The digital research team went from 300 people to about 50. They had the future, and they laid it off. You already know the date. On October 12th, 2001, 11 years to the day after the biggest patent win in American history, Polaroid Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Delaware. Before it filed, it cut 2,950 jobs. About a third of everyone left. The peak had been around 21,000 employees, back in 1978. And the strangest number is this one. Polaroid's best year for sales was 1994, $2.3 billion. Not the 70s, not the SX 70 years. 1994, 7 years before the end. The company was still selling. It just had nothing left to sell next. Here is the part almost nobody knows. Polaroid did not die once. In 2002, the brand was sold for $255 million. Then in 2005, a man named Tom Petters bought Polaroid for $426 million. In September 2008, federal agents raided his offices. Petters was running a Ponzi scheme worth around $3.5 billion. A court-appointed receiver later found that Polaroid had been bought with the proceeds of that fraud. He was sentenced to 50 years. And in December 2008, Polaroid filed for bankruptcy again, this time because the man who owned it was a criminal. Embalmed, sold, and killed a second time by a crime that had nothing to do with photography. So what actually killed Polaroid? Not Kodak. Polaroid beat Kodak, not digital. They built digital before almost anyone. Not ignorance. The Harvard researchers who went through the internal memos concluded that Polaroid had developed leading-edge capabilities. The technology was never the problem. What killed Polaroid was 70%. Once you have tasted a 70% margin, every other number in the world looks like a mistake. And so a company full of people who could see the future exactly decided the future wasn't worth having. They didn't fail to invent it. They invented it, looked at what it would cost them, and put it back in the drawer. That is the most expensive drawer in American business history. This is Bygonomics. Subscribe. That was Polaroid. So, who's next?